people always say blood is thicker than water. Let me tell you right now, blood will thin out fast when loyalty is tested. My name is Thelma Carrington. And before you hear the rest, tell me the time you're watching this in the comments, because this night right here, it didn't just change my life. It divided it clean in half. I didn't expect violence. Not in the house I built. Not from the woman my son married. Not while I was standing with a dish towel still damp in my hand. The first slap didn't sting. It stunned me. One moment I was reaching for a bowl on the counter. The next, crack, her palm landed across my cheek so fast my vision blinked white. The second slap was worse. It dragged fire across my skin, the sound sharp enough to slice the air open. I didn't even lift my hand in defense. I just stood there, breath suspended, staring at the woman my son vowed to protect. The woman who looked at me every day like I was a burden she never agreed to carry. Nia wasn't apologizing. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't shocked by what she did. She looked satisfied. "Brian," she said, voice cracking into a fake sob. "She hit me." The lie came out too fast, too smooth, like she had practiced. I froze. Not because of the accusation, but because of how naturally it rolled off her tongue. And Brian, my son, my baby boy I raised with hands that never harmed him, moved toward her like he was saving a wounded lamb instead of shielding his own mother from a lie. "You hit my wife?" he repeated, already believing her. My mouth fell open, but nothing came out. Shock has a way of silencing even the strongest woman. Shame too, but humiliation, that one pierces deeper than anything you can prepare for. "Brian," I managed quietly. I didn't touch her. His jaw tightened. A muscle jumped. He didn't even look at me, really look at me. He stood between us like a wall. A wall I had never seen before. Earlier that same morning, he'd snapped at me for lifting the lid off a pot on the stove. "Mama, stop touching things you don't understand," he'd said with a laugh that didn't match his eyes. I ignored it. I shouldn't have. Little cracks become earthquakes when you pretend they're not there. Nia stepped closer to him, leaning her head onto his shoulder. The same shoulders I once carried on my hips. "She always undermines me," she whispered dramatically. Always. That word felt like another slap, one that didn't touch my face, but went straight for my heart. Brian inhaled sharply, then turned to me with a look I will never forget. Tired, annoyed, cold. "Apologize to her," he said flatly, "or leave my house." My house. The one I built with Robert. The one I kept standing after burying him. The one I mopped, prayed in, cooked in, lived in. I looked at my son long enough to memorize the man he had become and the boy he no longer remembered being. I didn't apologize, not because I wanted a fight, but because something inside me had already cracked open, and apologies don't fix fractures this deep. I took my bag, walked past both of them, opened the door myself. Neither followed, neither called my name. The cold air hit my skin harder than the slap, sharp, disrespectful, honest. And when the door closed behind me, quiet and final, I realized something terrible. I had walked out with nothing but my heartbeat and my shame. And I had no idea where I was going next. The door clicked behind me like a judge signing a verdict. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I did, I knew the site of that house, the house I painted with Robert, the house that once smelled like cornbread on Sundays, would break me open in ways I wasn't ready for. The street felt unfamiliar, as if stepping out had dropped me into a different world entirely. My feet found the porch steps, then the walkway, then the sidewalk, all without my mind catching. Up. I kept moving, one hand wrapped around the strap of my purse like it was the last thing tying me to myself. The November evening light dimmed enough to make the air feel thick. Cars passed lazily. A street lamp flickered twice before steadying, almost like it wasn't sure I deserved light anymore. My breath fogged in the air as I walked past the yard I once trimmed, the porch rail I sanded, the flower bed Robert built with his calloused hands. I didn't know where I was walking. I just knew I couldn't stand outside that house staring at a door that no longer opened for me. By the time I reached the small strip of shuttered shops at the end of the block, my legs felt heavy. There was a bench in front of a closed beauty supply store, its windows dark, its sign tilted from years of wind and neglect. I eased myself onto it, my knees trembling more from shame than cold. It wasn't homelessness I felt. It wasn't poverty. I've lived with less before, but being pushed out by my own child, that made the night colder than any winter I'd survived. Brian had looked right through me, not around me, not past me, through me. And that kind of look, that's the look a stranger gives when they decide you're no longer part of their world. A small gust of wind lifted the hem of my sweater, snapping me back into the present. I pressed it down and forced my breath to slow. A car drove by with music loud enough to rattle the pavement, but even that noise couldn't distract me from the ache rising in my chest. That ache carried something else inside it, a memory I had tucked under years of trying to give them space. Months ago, when Brian and Nia had visitors over for a game night, I'd walked toward the living room with a tray of sliced fruit. I wasn't trying to interrupt anything. I just wanted to offer something. That's what mothers do. We give. Brian turned to me with a tight smile and said, "Mama, don't come to the living room when we have visitors. It makes things awkward." I had laughed. I even waved my hand like it was nothing, said something like, "Boy, go on," but there was a pinch in my chest that never left. I didn't allow myself to feel it then. Maybe I should have. The small streetlight cast a faint shadow of me stretched across the pavement, thin and trembling. I stared at it, wondering how a woman with my history, my sacrifices, my strength could look so small. I pulled my purse into my lap and opened it, not because I expected anything inside, but because I needed a distraction from the hollow feelings settling under my ribs. I hoped maybe for a stray dollar, a forgotten piece of gum, something to prove I had a grip on something. Anything in that moment. I found a few coins, a folded grocery receipt, and the tiny photo of Robert the First always kept at the bottom. I touched his face gently, then closed my eyes. "I hope you're seeing this," I whispered to him, "because I don't know how to start again at my age." My fingers brushed deeper inside the purse, searching for anything I could use to find a room or buy a small meal. And then something thin, plastic, cold, slid against my fingertips. I pulled it out. A card. Old. Edges worn. The same card Robert gave me years ago. For emergencies. I stared at it, my breath catching. If this wasn't an emergency, I didn't know what was. And that's where the night shifted. I barely slept that night. I sat on the edge of that cold bench until the sky softened from black to gray, watching the world wake up around me. By dawn, My stomach had begun to twist in that painful, hollow way it only does when it's been ignored too long. I'd gone hungry before in my life, but I had never gone hungry while my son slept under a roof I helped build. The card sat in my palm like a question I didn't want to answer. Robert had pressed it into my hand years ago, saying, "For emergencies, Thelma, you use this only when you truly need it." I used to tease him. "You think I'm helpless?" And he'd just smile that quiet smile of his. This was the first time I ever needed it. The bank opened at 8. At 7:30, I was already standing across the street, hugging my sweater tighter around me, trying to calm the trembling in my fingers. Hunger mixed with shame in a way that made my steps feel heavier with every block I walked. When the doors unlocked, I slipped inside quickly, hoping no one would notice the way I looked. Hair crushed from sleeping upright, clothes rumpled, eyes tired. I moved to the side, letting other people pass. They walked with purpose, with confidence, with the certainty of people who belonged. I felt like my presence tilted the air off balance. A young teller with soft eyes waved me forward. "Good morning, ma'am," she said gently. "How can I help you?" I placed the card on the counter, my voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to know if there's anything small in here, just enough to get a warm meal. Her eyes flicked toward mine, and then down to the card again. Something in her expression softened, but she didn't ask any questions. Thank God. I didn't have the strength to explain humiliation to a stranger before breakfast. As she typed on her keyboard, that ache in my stomach grew tighter, not from hunger, but from the thought that I was even standing here like this. I used to feed entire church events with my own hands. I used to slide plates of food to neighbors, no questions asked. I used to keep extra cornbread in the freezer, just in case somebody needs some. But life has a way of turning the giver into the beggar when you least expect it. While the teller typed, another memory pushed forward, clear, uninvited, cold. After Brian married Nia, he had started giving me what he called maintenance money. Nothing big, just a little every week. Something he said was for groceries, for your personal things, Mama. I never asked him for it. He insisted. But slowly, quietly, that changed. First, he forgot 1 week, then another. Then when I finally asked, not accusing, just checking, he said, "Mama, things are tight right now. Can you manage?" Manage. Like I hadn't been managing long before he was born. After that, whenever I asked, his tone shifted. He became short, defensive. "Nia's handling the budget now," he'd say. Or, "We'll see." Or, "Mama, stop asking like you don't have anything." Somewhere along the line, my son had stopped seeing me as someone to honor and started seeing me as someone to manage. The teller's typing slowed. Her shoulders straightened. Her eyes locked onto the screen, and a tiny crease formed between her brows. For a second, I thought the card had nothing, zero balance, expired, invalid, and my whole body braced to crumble. "Is everything okay?" I asked softly. She didn't answer immediately. She blinked once, then twice. Her mouth opened slightly, as if her breath had caught on something she hadn't expected to see. Then she looked up at me again, really looked at me, and her tone changed. "Ma'am," she said, voice suddenly careful, almost trembling with caution, "could you please sit down for a moment?" My heart dropped into my stomach. Sit down? Why? The room seemed to tilt. A new kind of fear slid into my chest, slow and cold. I gripped the edge of the counter as she repeated, softer this time, "Ma'am, please, sit." I sat down slowly, like my knees didn't quite trust the ground beneath them. The teller stepped away from the counter, whispering something to a supervisor I couldn't hear. People walked in and out of the bank behind me, shoes tapping on tile, doors swishing open and shut, life moving on as if mine hadn't just cracked open 20 minutes earlier. She returned with a printout in her hand. Not a small slip, a full sheet of paper. That alone made my heart thump unevenly, because nobody needs a whole sheet of paper to tell you your balance is $5. Ma'am, she said softly, pulling up a chair beside me instead of staying behind the counter, I want you to look at something. The chair scrape sounded too loud in that quiet space. I forced my trembling hands to take the paper from hers. At first, the numbers blurred. Hunger, exhaustion, humiliation, they all mixed, making my eyes burn. I blinked until the words sharpened. And then I saw it. A number so big it didn't look real. A number that didn't belong in my life. A number untouched for years. My breath broke into pieces. For a moment, the only sound I heard was the blood rushing in my ears. The room felt distant, dreamlike, as if someone had sliced time open and placed me gently inside the silence. My fingers pressed against the paper, feeling its texture. My late husband's name, Robert Carrington, still attached to the account as the original holder. A savings he'd kept hidden. A safety net he never mentioned again after giving me the card, like he wanted me to forget about it until I truly needed it. And he was right. This was need. My lips parted, but no words came out. I didn't feel joy, not shock, not even relief. What I felt was a soft collapsing inside myself, a slow, quiet breaking that came from realizing someone had loved me enough to prepare for the day the world would fail me. This wasn't money. This was memory. This was protection. This was a promise he made while he was alive, finding me now when I had nothing left to hold on to. I covered my mouth with my hand and bowed my head as tears slipped down my cheeks, silent and heavy. They weren't pretty tears. They were the kind you let fall only when you're so tired your bones feel hollow. The teller didn't speak. She didn't rush me. She didn't pity me. She only slid a box of tissues closer and placed a bottle of water beside me, like she understood exactly how fragile the moment was. That small kindness. I hadn't felt anything like it in years. Take your time, she whispered. I nodded, unable to do anything else. My whole life had been spent giving, cooking, supporting, carrying. And now here I was crumbling over a simple act of care from a stranger. I wiped my face and steadied my breathing. Slowly, I pushed the paperback toward her. Is this real? She nodded. Every cent. It's been untouched for a long time. Of course it had. Robert never wasted anything. She guided me to the desk where she printed statements, explaining gently what I could access and what steps I might want to consider. I listened quiet, absorbing every word but offering none back. Not out of rudeness, but because grief and gratitude were sitting on my chest at the same time. When I finally stood, the teller asked if I needed help getting a cab or calling someone. I told her no. I needed to be alone, for the first time in so long, in a way that didn't feel like punishment. I folded the balance sheet carefully, like it was something sacred, and placed it inside my purse. Each step toward the door felt steadier than the last. As the cool morning air hit my face outside, something inside me hardened, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in clarity. I looked down the street toward nothing in particular and whispered to myself, the first thing I'm getting back is my dignity. By noon, I found myself standing in front of a small brick office with a wooden sign that read Law Office of William Tate. The building wasn't fancy. No marble floors, no polished glass. Doors, just an old structure with blinds half drawn and a bell that chimed softly when I pushed the door open. It felt right, safe, quiet, human. Inside, a receptionist nodded kindly and guided me toward a small waiting area. My knees felt unsteady again, not from fear this time, but from the weight of choosing to fight after years of swallowing my pain. I clutched my purse close to me, my fingers pressed around the folded statement from the bank like it was proof that God hadn't forgotten me. When Attorney Tate came out to greet me, he wasn't what I expected. Not stiff, not overly serious. He had that calm black man's presence, the kind that makes a room feel less threatening. His voice was steady as he extended his hand. Mrs. Carrington, come on back. Take your time. Take your time. Those words alone almost brought tears to my eyes. His office smelled like old books and lemon polish. A single lamp cast warm light over a desk cluttered with neatly organized folders. He gestured for me to sit, then settled across from me, giving me his full attention without once checking his watch or computer. So, he said gently, tell me what brings you in. For a moment, silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable, just heavy, because this was the first time someone had asked me that question with real care in their voice. So I told him. I told him about the slaps, how fast they came, how the second one burned more than the first. I told him how Nia lied before I could even catch my breath. I told him about Brian believing her instantly, his face closing up like he'd been waiting for a reason. I told him about walking out, alone, hungry, ashamed, about finding Robert's card buried at the bottom of my purse, about going to the bank, hoping for a few dollars to buy a hot meal, and finding something far more powerful. As I spoke, he didn't interrupt. He didn't lean back. He didn't stare me down with pity. Instead, his eyes softened the longer I talked, and his hands remained still, folded on top of a legal pad he hadn't written a single word on yet. When I got to the part about the house, the confusion, the papers I'd signed while drowning in grief after Robert died, his brows lifted slightly. Do you have any of those documents? He asked. I nodded and reached into my purse, pulling out the faded envelope Robert had left. It was creased at the edges, the ink beginning to blur from years of handling. I'd never dared open it fully. My son had always insisted on taking care of things. Don't stress your head, Mama, he used to say, touching my shoulder with that practiced smile. Just sign what I give you. I've got it. At the time, I believed him without question. I was grieving. I was tired, and he was my child. I slid the envelope across the desk toward Attorney Tate. He put on his reading glasses and opened it carefully, as though it was something fragile. He didn't rush. He took his time unfolding each sheet, his eyes moving slowly across the text, pausing at names, dates, signatures. My heart thudded in my chest as I watched him. Minutes passed, the silence deepening, his expression sharpening with each page. Finally, he set the papers down, removed his glasses, and exhaled long and slow. Mrs. Carrington, he said, meeting my eyes head-on, your son took advantage of your grief. Attorney Tate didn't let me walk out of his office without a plan. After reviewing the documents and hearing everything I'd gone through, he closed the folder slowly, stood, and said, "Mrs. Carrington, you're not spending another night on a bench. Let me take care of that." His tone didn't leave room for argument, not because he was forceful, but because he spoke with the kind of quiet authority only men who've seen too much injustice carry. Before I could protest, he had already called a modest hotel a few blocks away and booked a room in my name. "You need rest," he said simply. "The kind a woman can't get when she's bracing for the next blow." I swallowed hard. I hadn't slept without fear in years, not since Nia moved in and turned Brian's heart into something I didn't recognize. I had forgotten what it felt like to rest without listening for footsteps, whispers, or doors slamming. The hotel wasn't fancy. A small 2-story building with a faded sign and flower pots lining the entrance. But when I stepped inside and the warm, clean air hit my face, something inside me loosened. The front desk clerk smiled, a real smile, and handed me a key card without judgment. My room smelled like fresh laundry. There was a small bed with a firm mattress, a clean bathroom, and a tiny window overlooking the street. It wasn't home, but it was mine for the night. Mine. I set my purse down gently, as if it would break if I handled it wrong. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing, letting the quiet settle around me like a soft blanket. No raised voices, no stomping feet, no waiting for the next insult disguised as a joke. Just silence. I walked into the bathroom and turned on the shower. Steam rose quickly, fogging the mirror. I stood under the warm water, letting it run through my hair, down my neck, across my back. It felt like the first real touch of comfort I'd had in what felt like years. At one point, I pressed my forehead against the wall and let the water hide the tears that came. When I stepped out, I found a menu on the nightstand. I ordered a simple meal, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Nothing fancy, but when the food arrived and I tasted the first bite, my throat tightened. I had forgotten what food tasted like when it wasn't seasoned by anxiety. Every mouthful soothed something small and aching inside me. Parts of myself I didn't know were hungry. After dinner, I lay on the bed, the firm mattress supporting my back in a way that felt almost protective. My eyes grew heavy, but I didn't fight it. For once, sleep didn't feel like surrender. It felt like permission. And when I finally drifted off, I fell into a dream that felt like memory and reality holding hands. Robert stood beside me in our old kitchen, sunlight touching his shoulders. He looked the way he did before sickness changed him. Strong, steady, eyes filled with gentleness. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and turned toward me with that half smile that always broke my worst days in half. "You hear me, Thelma?" he said. "Respect yourself enough to fight back." The words echoed, warm at first, then sharp, then firm. I reached for him, but he stepped back slowly, fading like morning fog. I woke up with wet lashes. For the first time in a long time, I didn't wake up to footsteps or slammed doors. I woke up to peace. I sat up, inhaled deeply, and placed my hand over my chest. Something in me felt different, like strength had crawled back into places fear had hollowed out. But peace doesn't last long when people like Nia are involved. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A voice note. I hesitated, then pressed play. Nia's voice poured out, sharp, annoyed, dripping with that familiar entitlement. "So, you're still forming victim? Come and apologize. The next morning, I walked into Attorney Tate's office with a steadier step than I'd had since the night everything shattered. It wasn't confidence, not yet, but the trembling inside me had quieted. The fear hadn't vanished. It had simply stepped aside long enough for something else to rise. Quiet anger, controlled, focused, clean. The kind of anger that doesn't yell, it plans. Attorney Tate greeted me with a nod and motioned for me to sit. He'd already cleared his desk, a legal pad open in front of him, and the envelope of documents laid neatly to the side. I went through everything, he said, sliding a pair of glasses onto the bridge of his nose. And we have a lot to cover. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them still. He picked up one of the forms I'd signed after Robert passed, one I barely remembered holding, much less reading. The paper looked harmless enough that any grieving wife would have trusted her son when he said, "Just sign this, Mama." "This," he said, tapping the line where my signature sat, "is a power of attorney document." I felt the words more than I understood them. "What does that mean for me?" "It means," he said carefully, "your son was given legal permission to act on your behalf. And used in the right situation, it's a helpful tool. But used the wrong way," he paused, choosing his words gently, "it gives someone the ability to move property, assets, accounts without needing your involvement." A slow heat began wrapping itself around my chest, not the heat of embarrassment, but the heat of awakening. "So, Brian, move the house?" "He didn't just move it," Tate said. "He transferred it, out of your name, into his." He leaned back, giving me space to absorb it. Power of attorney misuse is serious, and if you signed without understanding, especially while grieving, it's invalid. My jaw tightened. Grief was a fog I barely crawled through, and my own child had used that fog to blind me. While Tate spoke, a knock came at his door. The receptionist stepped in briefly with a small folder. "These came from the bank," she said. "They flagged some of the documents you requested." Tate accepted the folder with a quiet "thank you," then opened it. Inside were photocopies of Brian's authorization forms supposedly signed by me, forms supposedly verified by the bank. But my eyes locked on the handwriting. The signature. It wasn't mine. Not even close. Tate noticed my expression shift. "You see it too?" "Brian knows my handwriting." I whispered. "He knows it better than anyone." Tate nodded. "And that's exactly why this helps us." He flipped through the pages, his expression sharpening. "These inconsistencies, combined with the timing and your emotional state after Robert's passing, paint a clear picture. A picture I was finally ready to look at without flinching. Humiliation, when it sits long enough, begins to ferment. It thickens, hardens. It stops drowning you and starts shaping you instead. The shame that had silenced me now felt like fuel. "Mrs. Carrington," he continued, "you weren't careless. You were grieving. There's a difference. And the law recognizes that." I swallowed, the anger inside me steadying into something less explosive and more intentional. "What do we do now?" I asked. He took a long breath, then lifted the papers from the bank once more. "I'll file motions to challenge the transfer. We'll argue invalid consent, fraudulent authorizations, and misuse of power of attorney." He set the folder down and finally lifted his eyes to mine. "But before I file, I need to know if you're ready for this. It won't be easy. It won't be pretty, and Brian may fight back. His words didn't make me waver. Not this time. Not anymore. I straightened my back slowly, feeling every inch of myself returning, piece by piece. I'm ready, I said. I've been quiet too long. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not triumphant, but respectful. Good, he said softly. He gathered all the documents into one stack, aligned the edges, and tapped them against the desk like sealing a verdict. Then he looked up at me and said the words that made my breath hitch in my chest. We have enough to start filing. 2 days later, I sat across from Attorney Tate again, the morning sun slanting through the blinds in narrow stripes. He had called earlier, asking me to come in because some additional documents arrived. His voice carried a weight that made my stomach tighten the whole ride over. The moment I stepped inside his office, I knew something was different. He didn't greet me with his usual calm expression. Instead, he gestured toward the chair with a slow exhale, as if bracing me for something heavy. I want you to see these, he said, opening a new envelope marked with the bank's return address. My hands folded in my lap. Still, waiting. He pulled out a stack of neatly clipped pages, legal forms, internal notes, bank-mandated verifications. Then he slid one page forward. This, he said, tapping the top corner, is the justification your son provided for gaining full access to your property and accounts. I leaned in. One line jumped out at me like a blow to the chest. Client exhibits signs of mental instability and impaired judgment following spouse's death. My breath stalled. Not the house. Not the money. Not even the forged signature. This was the wound. He said that. I whispered. Tate's expression softened. It appears he told the bank that decision-making was unsafe in your hands, that you were disoriented, unfit to manage property. The room blurred for a moment as the memory surfaced, not gently but like something ripping through me. The days after Robert died were a fog I barely survived. I cried until my body trembled. I forgot to eat. I sat on the living room floor with his shirts in my lap, inhaling the faint scent of him until my chest hurt. People dropped by to check on me, whispering condolences that slid in and out of my ears like static. One afternoon, I heard Brian talking to the Hendersons from next door. She's not herself, he'd said quietly. Mama's not thinking straight right now. At the time, it didn't sting. It sounded like concern. A son trying to explain grief he didn't know how to handle. But seeing those words on paper now, weaponized, cold, calculated, twisted my heart in ways the slap never did. Attorney Tate flipped to another page. There's more. I forced myself to look. Recommended. Son to manage decisions due to mother's emotional instability. It was written in a banker's neat handwriting, checked, and initialed. My humiliation had been neatly documented, approved, filed away like routine paperwork. I leaned back in the chair, pressing my palm lightly against my chest. The hurt was deep, slow burning, precise. A different kind of betrayal. One that didn't shout, but whispered behind closed doors. Mental instability. I murmured, tasting the words like something bitter. Brian knows I've never had a sick day in my life. Not one. Tate nodded. He took what was already true, that you were grieving, and twisted it into a weakness he could legally use. I closed my eyes for a moment. Grief had made me slow, not ignorant, vulnerable, not unstable. But Brian hadn't drawn that line carefully. He had erased it entirely when it suited him. When did he submit these? I asked. Tate pointed at the date. It sat only a week after Robert's funeral, when I could barely stand up without holding onto furniture. Something inside me hardened, slow, steady, controlled. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity, a realization that everything I doubted, everything I brushed aside as marriage influence, had been part of a much deeper shift in my son. Mrs. Carrington, Tate said softly, I need you to understand. What he did wasn't a misunderstanding. It was intentional. My lips tightened. He used my grief as a tool. Yes, Tate said, and not a small one. He gathered the papers into a crisp pile, tapping the edges together before looking back up at me. This changes everything. The courthouse smelled like old wood and cold air, two scents that always find a way to settle in your bones. I walked beside Attorney Tate, my fingers gripping the strap of my purse so tightly my knuckles looked pale. I told myself I was ready. I told myself I was strong. But the truth was simple. No mother walks into a courtroom to face her child without shaking somewhere deep inside. Brian was already seated with his attorney when we walked in. He didn't look back. Not once. His shoulders hunched forward, his jaw tight, his fingers tapping against his knee like he couldn't decide whether to run or stay still. It was the first time I'd seen him look unsure, not bold, not confident, just unsettled. I took my seat behind Tate, swallowing against the dryness in my throat. The judge entered, papers shuffled, voices lowered. Everything moved with a kind of cold efficiency that made emotion feel out of place, like it didn't belong here. But emotion lived inside me anyway, tight, hot, and trembling. Tate stood first. Calm. Steady. Every word he spoke was clean, precise. No dramatics. No raised voice. Just truth laid out in careful order. Your Honor, he began, we are here today because a grieving widow, Mrs. Thelma Carrington, was stripped of her legal rights through the misuse of a power of attorney. Signatures were forged, conditions were misrepresented, and her grief was exploited for personal gain. Each sentence landed like a quiet hammer. Brian shifted in his seat, eyes fixed on the table. I watched the line of his shoulders drop, slightly, like he was shrinking inside his own skin. Seeing my son like that hurt, but not more than everything he'd done. Tate continued, placing copies of the fraudulent signatures on the judge's bench. These documents, he tapped them lightly, do not match Mrs. Carrington's handwriting in any known form. We have bank statements showing unauthorized transfers. We have timelines that align directly with the week she was psychologically and emotionally overwhelmed after her husband's passing. Brian's attorney objected once, claiming circumstance, but even he sounded unconvinced. There are lies that stand tall and lies that collapse under their own weight. Brian's were the second kind. Then Tate stepped aside, signaling for the witness we had prepared. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor from 2 houses down, rose slowly and made her way to the stand. A kind woman with soft eyes and a voice that always sounded like she was minutes away from a church hymn. She adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. I ain't here to lie on nobody, she said plainly, but I heard things that didn't sit right with me. My heart thudded as she spoke. I heard his wife yelling at her, calling her names I won't repeat in a courtroom. I saw her cry on the porch after one argument. She paused, looked directly at the judge, and I saw that good woman shrink more and more every month. She wasn't unstable. She was mistreated. Brian's head dropped lower. He pinched the bridge of his nose, breathing hard. Guilt sat on him like a heavy coat. I sat perfectly still, shaking only on the inside. The judge listened without expression, but his eyes flicked from the documents to Brian twice. And then he leaned back, hands folded, and exhaled as though the pieces had finally settled. Tate approached once more, voice steady. Your Honor, we request immediate reversal of the property transfer pending full investigation. Silence stretched across the room like a held breath. The judge tapped his pen twice, looked directly at Brian, then at me, and spoke with the weight of decision. Effective immediately, the house is returned to Mrs. Carrington pending further review. The words echoed like a bell in my chest. Brian's head snapped up, his face pale. My fingers tightened around my purse, but this time not from fear. The courtroom did not bow to tears. It bowed to truth. The key felt colder than I remembered. It sat in my palm like a piece of metal pulled from another lifetime, a lifetime where my name meant something inside my own home. I stood at the doorway for a long moment, breathing in the faint scent of dust and old wood. The porch boards creaked under my feet, greeting me like an old friend who wasn't sure if I'd come back angry or broken. When I finally turned the key and pushed the door open, a quiet, heavy stillness washed through the house. Not peace, not yet, just silence. The first kind that didn't come from being ignored. A silence that invited me to step inside. I moved slowly, my hand brushing the wall the way you touch an injured animal, gentle, cautious, remembering both love and pain. The cool paint met my fingers first, then the grooves in the wood beneath. I had painted this hall myself, 2 coats, humming old hymns while Robert brought me lemonade. Every inch of this space held a memory, a mark, a version of me. But memories don't shield you from what you've lived through. I walked farther in, each step measured. Nothing in this house had struck me or lied on me, yet somehow it shared the bruises. My eyes drifted over the dining table where I used to fold laundry, the kitchen doorway where Brian once surprised me with a birthday cake, the living room rug where Nia would walk past me like I was a misplaced piece of furniture. A knot formed in my chest, not triumph, not victory, but grief so quiet it felt like a whisper under my ribs. I touched the back of the couch, fingertips trailing over the fabric. I'm home, I murmured, not sure if I was saying it to the walls or to myself. The house smelled faintly of her perfume. Sharp floral, the kind that tries too hard to mask something underneath. I walked toward the stairs, feeling the air shift as if the house itself were remembering me. Halfway up, something caught my eye. A notebook, tossed carelessly on the small table by the landing. Its cover was familiar, pink with gold lettering that read, "Personal Notes." I hesitated before picking it up, my thumb tracing the edge. I shouldn't open this, I thought. But then I remembered the slaps, the lie, the eviction disguised as a command, the years of quiet humiliation. I opened it. The first page was harmless, lists of errands, grocery items, reminders. But the second page changed everything. In messy handwriting, circled twice, Nia had written, "Find a way to get her out. She's dead weight. Dead weight. The words hit harder than those slaps ever did. On the next line, Brian won't stand up to her. Has to be pushed. The page blurred for a moment. I blinked fast, letting the air steady itself around me. I turn another page. More notes, some crossed out, some underlined. She doesn't contribute. She makes the house feel old. Brian needs to prioritize our life. And then, circled in angry strokes. Once she's gone, everything will be ours. My breath left me in a slow, shaky exhale. Not heartbreak, not anger, just a deep, exhausted grief, like watching someone carve your worth into smaller pieces each day until you start believing you deserve the smallness. I closed the notebook gently, too gently, considering what I'd just read. My hand didn't shake this time. It stayed steady, firm, almost calm. Downstairs, the afternoon light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and snapped clear photos of every damning page. Then I texted them to Attorney Tate. 3 dots appeared almost instantly as he typed. A moment later, my phone vibrated with his message. Received. This is important. Keep the notebook safe. I closed the phone, pressed the notebook to my chest, and let the silence settle once more. Then, without another word, I sent the entire notebook straight to my lawyer. The morning after I sent the notebook to Attorney Tate, my phone started buzzing before the sun even rose. I answered with sleep still clinging to my voice. We're filing today, Tate said. Elder abuse, emotional distress, fraudulent misuse of power of attorney, and the notebook? He paused. That's the nail they can't pull out. I sat on the edge of my bed, my fingers gripping the blanket. Do what needs to be done. He didn't need more. By noon, the wheels were turning, legal documents filed, notices prepared, motions stamped, scheduled, and on their way. There's a sound justice makes when it begins moving toward people who never expected it. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's a quiet, heavy rustle, like the shifting of something long overdue. By afternoon, the consequences began walking toward them. First, it was the courthouse clerk delivering stamped paperwork to Nia's workplace. She was seen outside arguing with the messenger, her voice sharp enough to cut through glass. A co-worker later told someone in the neighborhood that she went pale when she realized what the papers were. Elder abuse, fraud, emotional manipulation, words that don't wash off easily. Then it happened quickly. Panic makes people reveal their true nature. Nia didn't run home to comfort Brian. She didn't hold his hand or whisper, "We'll get through this." No, she turned on him like a cornered animal. According to the same co-worker, Nia muttered, "This is your fault. You told me she wouldn't fight back. You told me everything was safe." Fear and blame, two ingredients that crumble alliances. By late afternoon, I heard from Tate again. They're serving notices now. I stood in the living room, the same room where I had folded clothes, endured snide comments, and shrunk myself to fit inside a house I had built. The sunlight filtered through the windows, warm and gentle, nothing like the tension building outside. Then I heard it. Car doors, firm footsteps, voices. I stepped closer to the window. 2 police officers walked up the driveway to the house Brian had believed was his to use, his to control, his to dictate. Their uniforms looked almost unreal against the backdrop of my front lawn, symbols of authority arriving not to protect him this time, but to correct him. They knocked on the door next door. His temporary apartment, the one he'd moved into after the court, returned the house to me. I could hear muffled shuffling inside, then the door cracking open. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. "Are you Brian Carrington? We're here with court notices. You are required to—" The words faded as my ears buzzed with something I hadn't felt in a long time, vindication tinged with sorrow. Watching my own child stand in front of officers was nothing I would ever take pleasure in. But watching accountability arrive, that was different. That was necessary. Brian stepped outside fully now, hand on his head, pacing, his face flushed with panic. He wasn't looking at the officers. He wasn't looking at the papers. He was looking toward my house. Eyes wide, breath uneven, a mixture of fear and regret spreading across his features like ink on cloth. And somewhere in the middle of that scene, Nia appeared too, walking fast from her car, pointing at him, her voice rising. "This is on you. I didn't force you to do anything. You dragged me into this mess." The officers told her to step back, but she kept ranting. Desperation makes people loud. Brian finally muttered something, held out his hands, and took the stack of documents. His shoulders folded inward, the weight settling instantly. I didn't watch the rest. I stepped back from the window, letting the curtain drop gently. For a moment, the house felt too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath along with me. Then came the sound that pulled everything tight inside my chest. A single knock, not timid, not aggressive, just searching. I turned slowly. My son was at my door. I opened the door slowly, not because I was afraid, but because the sight of my son standing there felt too heavy to rush into. Brian looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders bent, eyes swollen from a mix of panic and sleeplessness. His breath hitched when he saw me in the doorway. "Mama, please," he whispered. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. Not yet. He was asking for entry, a chance to speak, a chance to unravel whatever was twisting inside him. I stepped aside without a word. He walked in carefully, like he was afraid the floor might collapse beneath him. The house felt different with him inside it. Familiar shadows, old memories pressed against walls that had seen both love and harm. He glanced around, guilt stitched into every movement. I didn't know it would go this far. He started, voice breaking on the last word. I never wanted it to get this bad. I didn't answer. I sat on the couch, hands folded neatly, waiting, letting him feel the silence that used to swallow me when he allowed others to speak over me. He sat opposite me, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. "Mama," I didn't read half of what Nia gave me. He said, "Finally." She'd hand me papers and say, "It's just house stuff. Sign it so we can settle things." And his voice cracked. I didn't want arguments at home. There it was, the confession that revealed everything without excusing anything. I thought, if I didn't push back, she'd stop complaining. He continued. I didn't want trouble in my marriage. I held my breath for a moment, letting the words settle, not for their content, but for their weight. "So you made trouble for your mother instead?" I asked quietly. He winced like the sentence had a physical edge. His hands dropped to his lap. He stared at them. I wasn't thinking. I was tired. I just wanted peace. And I didn't. I replied, "You think I didn't want peace in my own house?" The question wasn't rhetorical. It wasn't an outburst. It was truth laid bare and trembling. He looked up for the first time, and what I saw there wasn't arrogance or stubbornness. It was a man finally seeing the damage he'd done. "I'm sorry, Mama," he said. "I swear I didn't understand what she was doing. I just listened. I let her talk for both of us. I let her decide everything. I didn't want to lose her." A sad, tired ache pulled through me. Years of swallowed words, quiet insults, late-night tears in a room that no longer felt like mine. "I lost you instead," I said. He blinked hard. Tears slipped down, unhidden. There was a small knock on the open doorway to the kitchen. A young man wearing an apron, someone delivering food from the local diner, stood there. "Ma'am, you okay?" he asked gently. "You want me to wait outside till he leaves?" I hadn't realized he'd heard our voices. I hadn't realized anyone was paying attention. But the softness in his tone, the concern, it was the first public kindness I'd been offered in a very long time. "I'm fine, baby," I said. "Thank you." He nodded and stepped back outside, respecting my space. Brian watched the exchange with a hollow expression. "Even strangers treat you better than I did," he murmured. I didn't deny it. He leaned forward, voice shaking. "Mama, I'll fix it. I'll talk to the lawyer. I'll tell the court I messed everything up. No," I interrupted. His mouth trembled. "Mama." "I listened to you," I said quietly. "Now you listen to me." He nodded slowly, bracing himself. "I hear your apology," I said. "I hear your pain, your regret, your explanations." He swallowed. "But I can't forgive you today." The morning after Brian left my house in tears, I woke up to sunlight slipping through the curtains like a quiet invitation. For the first time in months, I wasn't waking to someone else's footsteps, someone else's moods, someone else's rules. I woke to my own breath, my own thoughts, my own space. I stood in the center of my living room and looked around. Nothing was ruined. Nothing was destroyed. But everything felt disturbed. A house remembers disrespect, even in silence. It holds echoes of raised voices and footsteps that walked over your dignity. So I picked up the dusting cloth from the kitchen drawer and started with the coffee table. Each wipe felt like cleaning away more than dust, like brushing off remnants of every moment I'd been talked over, looked through, dismissed. The house had survived, and so had I. It was time to bring both of us back to ourselves. Fresh air drifted in as I opened windows room by room. Curtains fluttered. The scent of outside folded into the walls. Light spread through corners that had been dim for too long. I moved slowly, intentionally, straightening picture frames, placing my Bible back beside the lamp, rearranging the cushions the way I always liked them, returning my husband's framed photo to the mantel, centered, respected. "Welcome home," I whispered to myself. As I was wiping down the hallway table, I heard footsteps outside. Then a familiar voice called from the porch, "Miss Thelma, you back in the house for good." I opened the door to see Mr. and Mrs. Henderson standing there, hands full of cleaning supplies, and two young teens behind them holding a broom and mop. The sight alone filled my chest with warmth. "We came to help you clean up," Mrs. Henderson said, stepping closer. "We're glad you're back." Their kindness hit me deeper than I expected. For months, I'd walked past neighbors with eyes lowered, hiding my shame. Now they were on my porch, uninvited, yet welcome, offering hands instead of gossip. Inside, the teens swept the floors while Mr. Henderson tightened loose hinges on the kitchen cabinets. "You don't have to do this," I said softly. "We want to," he replied. "It's good to have your spirit back in this house." His words soaked into me like warm water. People had seen more than I realized. People had noticed the shift in my joy long before I could admit it to myself. As we cleaned, Mrs. Henderson hummed an old gospel tune, one that used to play on Sunday mornings when Robert and I opened the windows and let the smell of pancakes fill the house. The melody wrapped around me like a memory I thought I'd lost. By afternoon, the house had transformed, not through grand renovations, but through small, loving touches. Every corner felt more like me, more like home. When the Hendersons left, they hugged me tight. "If you need anything," Mrs. Henderson whispered, "call us." I nodded, trying not to let tears fall. The house settled into a peaceful stillness once they were gone. A stillness that didn't silence me, but held me. I walked back into the living room and sat on the couch, letting the quiet wrap around me. I wasn't the same woman who walked out of this house with only a purse and wounded pride. I wasn't the woman who kept shrinking to avoid conflict. I was rebuilding not just walls or furniture, but every part of myself they tried to break. A soft knock interrupted the silence. I stood, expecting a neighbor with leftover supplies, maybe even the teens returning a mop. But when I opened the door, it wasn't a neighbor. It was Attorney Tate, suit crisp, expression unreadable, a large envelope in his hand, sealed with the bank's stamp. "Thelma," he said gently, "this just came in." He held it out to me. The envelope felt heavier than paper in my hands. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table, as if it were something fragile, something living. My fingers hesitated at the seal, feeling a familiar tightness in my throat. Attorney Tate had already left, giving me space. The house was quiet again, but this silence felt different. Expectant, waiting. I slid my thumb under the flap and opened it slowly. Inside was a single folded sheet. Aged around the edges, the paper softened by time. My breath caught when I saw the handwriting. Robert's handwriting. The room tilted just a little. I sat quickly, placing the letter flat on the table before unfolding it. His script was steady, the way it always looked when he wanted his words to matter. "My dear Thelma," it began. My heart clenched. If you are reading this, it means life took a turn I prayed it wouldn't. You've always had a gentle heart, and gentle hearts can be misunderstood. I worry, sweetheart, not about you surviving. You're stronger than anyone knows. I worry about you being silenced. A tear fell before I could stop it. It splashed on the page, blooming into the paper fibers. I pressed my fingertips to the edge of the letter, steadying myself. You love deeply, and sometimes people mistake that kind of love for weakness. If the day comes when someone tries to make you feel small or pushes your voice into a corner, I want you to remember this. Your pain is real, your worth is real, and you do not owe silence to anyone. The words blurred again. He had seen this coming. Not the details, not the betrayal, but the possibility of vulnerability. The possibility that kindness could be used against me. I left you everything I could, not because I didn't trust our son, but because I wanted to be sure you had something with your name on it. Something no one could take unless you let them. Promise me you will fight if you need to. Promise me you will speak when it matters. I covered my mouth, the sob escaping before I could hold it back. Not sadness. This wasn't grief alone. It was the ache of being loved, truly, intentionally, protectively. The ache of realizing someone thought ahead for you even when you weren't thinking for yourself. I traced his name at the bottom. Yours always, Robert. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The kitchen faded. The house faded. All that existed was the sound of my heartbeat and the warmth of knowing Robert had still been taking care of me, even from a distance he could never return from. Through tears, I stood and carried the letter to the living room. I placed it beside his framed photo on the mantel. My hand lingered on the glass. Thank you, I whispered, for seeing me, for protecting me even after you were gone. The sun shifted, casting a soft glow on his picture, almost like acknowledgement. I stepped back, wiping my face with slow, deliberate movements. I felt cleaner inside, stronger, not because of the money, not because of the house, but because I had been reminded of a love that never belittled me, never silenced me, never made me feel like a burden. As I sat on the couch, the quiet pressed around me again. Not heavy, not empty, just reflective. My eyes drifted toward the doorway, the same doorway Brian used to run through as a child. Arms wide, face bright, shouting, "Mama!" There was a time when he hugged me without hesitation, without shame, without influence from someone else's expectations. I swallowed hard, the memory sharp enough to sting. I wasn't ready to forgive him, but I was ready for something else. The truth. A real conversation. Not an apology drenched in panic. Not excuses shaped by desperation. A moment where he stood in front of me as his own man. I reached for my phone. My thumbs hovered over the screen for a moment before I typed slowly, intentionally, "Meet me tomorrow, alone." I hit send. The next morning, the sky hung low with soft clouds, the kind that promise neither rain nor sunshine, just quiet. I chose the small park on Elmwood, the one with the old wooden benches, and the tall oaks that sway like they're listening. It was neutral ground, a place where memories didn't shout, but whispered. I arrived early, holding a thermos of tea with both hands to steady myself. I wasn't nervous. I was preparing. There's a difference. Preparing means you know what must be done. When Brian finally appeared at the far end of the path, I knew it was him by the way he walked, shoulders dipped, steps slow, like his body carried more apology than he had words for. He stopped a few feet away, breath shaky. "Mama," he said quietly. I nodded toward the bench. "Sit." He obeyed immediately, hands clasped between his knees, staring down like the ground was the only thing willing to meet his eyes. I sat beside him, leaving space between us, not out of anger, but clarity. Some distances tell the truth better than words. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind rustled through the trees. A little girl in the distance squealed with laughter, chasing a bubble that drifted just out of reach. Her joy carried across the park, pure and bright, brushing the edges of my heart with a memory. A small boy with missing teeth running into my arms after school, shouting, "Mama, watch me." That boy felt far away, but not gone. Brian finally exhaled. I messed up. His voice cracked. I messed up bad. I didn't soften. Not this time. Yes, you did. He swallowed hard, nodding. I wasn't thinking. I let her run everything. I didn't check anything. I didn't protect you. You didn't respect me, I corrected gently. His eyes closed. A tear slipped out, tracing down his cheek. I know. I turned slightly to face him. Do you know why I fought back? He hesitated. Because the house was yours. No, I said, I fought because of the slaps, because of the lies, because when I needed you to stand beside me, you stepped behind her. He covered his mouth with one hand, shoulders trembling. I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry. This time, I let the silence sit. Let the weight of everything he'd done fill the space between us. Forgiveness is not a switch, it's a door. And doors don't open until the truth is fully spoken. After a long moment, I said quietly, I'm not here to punish you the way you might be expecting. He looked up confused. I'm not here to shout. I added, or curse you, or tear you down. His eyes softened, a flicker of hope. But I am here to set terms, I said. My terms. He straightened, listening. You will earn your place back in my life, I said calmly. Not by rushing, not by crying, but by choosing differently, constantly, consistently, by showing up, by proving you understand what you broke. His breath hitched. You don't get to walk back into my heart like nothing happened, I continued. You work your way in, slowly. He nodded, tears rolling freely. I'll do whatever you need me to. I promise. A gentle breeze brushed past us, as if carrying away the heaviness. The child nearby laughed again, the bubble bursting in the air. Life moving forward. I stood slowly. Brian rose too, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Mama, will you ever forgive me fully? He whispered. I stepped closer, laying a hand on his shoulder, not close enough to comfort, but close enough to guide. That depends on the man you choose to be, I said. He nodded, understanding. I turned toward the path home, feeling taller, steadier, whole. As I walked away, the truth settled peacefully inside me. He took my house for a moment, but he can never take the woman who built it.